reminder.
In regards to the budget, it also applies to some of the other agenda items. I was wondering how it's a kind of a market share question. Denton County's grown so fast. I was just wondering, like, what was our ridership maybe when we began, or 5 years ago? What is it today? By the same token as the budget, what has the budget done long-term and financially, like on our revenues that we collect from ridership in relation to population growth? That's kind of my questions. I don't expect everybody to have that readily available at their fingertips, but that is trying to get a trend though. How are we doing?
Mr. Vice Chair, I can address that to some extent. The short answer on Denton County population growth is that we're the 6th fastest growing county in the country. We've provided information to our board at the strategic workshop earlier in the month about how year over year DCTA ridership has not matched that population growth. As a matter of fact, it's gone in the other direction. And that's part of the reason, obviously, what's initiated all the service changes we've seen over the course of the last several years. What I'd propose for that is an agenda item in the one of our next meetings, our next meeting, that talks about that trend and what we might be thinking about in terms of establishing long-term goals and objectives around ridership by 2030 across all of our modes, and the role that NTMC might play in that. So if the chair and vice chair would like to set that sort of agenda item, I can bring that back and have that conversation. I will say one of the things that was flagged in our budget discussion with our board in the workshop was the fact that the budget for the bus operation has not matched the reductions in service over the course of time. And so that is an open question to the DCTA board has posed, is how will the bus operations budget match the level of service change that's happened over the course of the last couple of years? And I think we'll start talking a little bit about that today.
That'd be fantastic.
I think Rich Pearl has some comments on the ridership actually being over here later on in his report too, which will give you a little bit of headway going forward into the next meeting, which thing we just talked about, and giving us some plan for that. Right now, we're on the monthly financial statements that were presented to us. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on monthly financial reports? Okay, that does not take an approval. Is that correct, Councilor?
It might need approval.
That's what I thought. Okay, so the next item is the regular agenda presentation of General Manager's monthly report. Mr. Pearl and Ms. Francois, I'm sorry. Y'all will go ahead and make that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start off with the NTMC positions. We have a parts coordinator position that is open now. So we are hiring for a parts coordinator as well as a dispatcher, and then 14 bus operators. We recently extended an offer for a customer service manager, which was accepted. And he will be starting this coming Monday. So we're looking forward to great things from him. And it was a pretty exhaustive search, and we had some very well qualified applicants for it. But we believe that we've got the best person for the position, and we'll really look to see what he can do with the customer service department. So moving on, and Vice Chair Hayes, you mentioned something about ridership within the packet here on the agenda item for the National Transit Database. The print is rather small, but it does, if that can be blown up some, I believe it's going to be in the corner up there. So this is 2018, 2019, and 2020, and that does have the ridership. And this is just the information is provided from bus operations, it's provided from rail, it's provided from all modes up to DCTA, and then DCTA reports on this to National Transit Database. So this is just a wealth of information here. It gives you mileage, it gives you number of passengers, unlinked trips. So it does have a lot of information in there across all modes. And be happy to blow this up a little bit more and provide that to you. So it's a little bit easier to read, but it is broken down by modal view, and you can go to, there's bus, demand response, rail, van pool. So all of that information is on here, number of vehicles. So it does provide, again, a lot of information on DCTA. If you wanted to delve into it, it's all there and available.
Yeah. I think that'd be helpful. Are you saying this first page here is just 2018?
Yes, first one is 2018.
Okay, where do I find that date on here?
That's at the very top, just below Denton County Transportation
Okay.
Authority. It's a 2018 annual agency program.
Then we have a 19 and a 20.
Yes, sir.
So Maurice, and for the chair and vice chair, we provide to the DCTA board gets a monthly ridership report. That's a basic executive level graph of year over year ridership. I'd propose, just so that we have the same thing going across all channels, that we use that in this packet. And Troy is engaged in the development of those reports every month. We also have a live dashboard that's going to be launched with information that the public can access. It's a Microsoft Power BI dashboard that you can move make different selections and pick different data sets to view. I'd like to see us integrate that into this report. I know the NTD data is certainly what we report outward to the feds, but the graphs I'm talking about are the ones we use locally, and they're pretty simple to digest and all that sort of stuff. So Troy, can you help to get that into I definitely want to have this conversation every month. I think it's important for us to be talking about the numbers, but let's we can keep using this, but let's also use that.
Yes, and this is just informational, that there's a lot of information out there on the transit system. There's the history, so just wanted to present this to the board, and then as far as displaying this information, it'll fall off, and then we can go to more of the data that DCTA has in front of us.
Yeah, my eyes are tired, so these this micro print's a little tough to read. I don't know how you blow it up. I don't know if you have to go to legal size paper or what's on one page ends up on two or something, but a larger font would be helpful. And from looking at these from 18, 19, and 20, what do you generally get from this information? What do you see happening?
So you can look at the ridership, the unlinked passenger trips, which is under service consumption, and then the bus fleet as well, and what the operations characteristics are, the operating expenses. It's a historical reference to what it was in the past, and then going years forward on the information that it just gives you a historical perspective on the transit system itself. More specifically for us would be the bus and demand response side of it.
So when I was asking my question, what conclusions are you taking from all this data?
It's informational for the board, just to let you know that there is a wealth of information out there. And then along with this, as Paul mentioned, there's a lot of information that DCPA gathers as well. So from my perspective, for myself, I would be looking at what the ridership was in 2018, 2019, 2020. And then what the bus fleet was, and then that will run into in 2020, 2021, when the pandemic hit, then you would be able to see how that trend was affected during that time. So 2021 information is not out yet, but this is just, and we can break this down, but like you said, Paul, you have more information that is shortened up rather than all of this. So we'll just wanted to advise the board that this information is out there for review. However, just presenting that, and then we'll move on to a more condensed version of the ridership and the bus fleet.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'd like to actually have a conversation with Maurice and the team about how we have a pretty good view. I mean, this in the 2020, we obviously are seeing months that we're reporting to our board 1 month in arrears as to what's happening on the ridership front. I'd like to see us get to some sort of daily report that when the tabulation forms come off the bus, they get tabulated and able to be condensed in an executive format on a daily basis. I think we ought to be getting to that place across the whole agency. We ought to be getting to standardized ridership reporting across the whole agency. The dashboards are already existing, so we just need to get this board plugged into those data sources.
So you're saying you've got the capability, the software and the dashboard to do all that, you just got to feed it in there.
Well, it exists. This board just needs to be apprised of that, just like our DCTA board does. We all ought to be working off the same scope,
Exactly.
you know.
A question I have, a couple, one on these the screens basically up there. Can you explain the difference between, I'm sure I just don't quite understand, the operating expense per vehicle revenue miles, and then the operating expense per passenger mile? How does that differ? I mean, I know they're two different items, but in correlation to the passenger versus the vehicle mile, how does that differ? There's a significant difference there. It's reasonable.
Chairman.
Yes.
This is John Henderson. I think for the board,
Let's get you a mic.
sorry. This is John Hendrickson. I think for the board, these performance measures are the important parts to look at. And the question that you asked is what's the difference between operating expense per vehicle revenue mile and then the operating expense per passenger mile? So if I get 2 passengers on there and they travel 5 miles, the vehicle travels 5 miles, just in simple terms. The vehicle miles is 5 miles, but the passenger miles is 10 miles.
Okay.
So whenever you're looking at that, and those are all based upon what the national standards are for transit. But I think for this board, a lot of the things that you want to look at is if you look up here under the operational characteristics, you want to look at that line item for budget and then the line item for demand response, and then you can compare those year to year for each fiscal year, and you can kind of see how the expenses have went up. And you see a kind of a drastic increase for 2020 over what it was in 2018. But a lot of that was related to COVID and some of the additional pays and things that we did, incentives to keep people employed, and then also overtime because people were out with COVID and things like that. But whenever you look at your performance measures, the biggest issues to look at is, what is your expense? I always look at the hours. So what is my vehicle expense per revenue hour? So for demand response, we're looking at $115. And then for bus, you're looking at $92. And then I'll compare those back against what the national averages are and look at sister cities in the state of Texas to kind of see how that compares, to see how we're performing. Overall, I think DCTA is performing well compared to the national standards. It's just, how do we maximize each one of those dollars and get the most bang for our buck? And I think that's what we need to start really kind of diving into to see what makes the most sense.
Okay, and I hear what you're saying, I think that's great. I wonder if, give me this, but I really like graphs. Much better than these numbers having to be approved. What you just said makes sense as we look at those items, and then we compare them to the national standards. If we just get some graphs on that show how we're performing in those particular items, and then have a graph or item right next to it in comparison to the national standard, that would kind of give, and it might even help if, I don't know if national standard can we do a regional standard, because I would think we're a lot different from the Northeast. As far as these items go.
I think it would be, if we can get the data from some of the other areas, I think that would be looking at Dart or Trinity Metro or some of that. That might be a little bit challenging.
Even also.
but,
Under the other
yeah.
states, maybe the Southwest or some of the other.
Yes, sir.
places that
We
have-
can see what data is out there and available to see, because I'd like y'all to be informed on how you compare against sister cities and
Right.
how it makes sense for the ways that we're operating service.
Back to that. Oh, but you want to try to do a comparison to like situations, you know, in comparison to Chicago and New York.
Correct.
It'd be a totally different situation from what we have.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, if we could narrow it down, something like that, and kind of give us a graph, and I'm not saying do this overnight, but kind of as we go forward, like you said, we put all that different information we do on, you kind of accumulate it on a daily basis, but at the end of the month, you can show exactly how each one of those items compares to our peers. You know what I'm saying? It's people in the same general type of a situation.
Yes, sir.
Did you get something?
Yeah. So was this information I know we're about to talk about the budget, so don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but was information like this used in the budget process? And if so, did you use more updated information as that was going forward? Just looking at, you're kind of focusing on the operating expense per passenger mile. That's difficult to really get a handle on because of 2020, right? The number of passenger miles went down significantly in 2020 and 2018 and 19. So as we look at the budget for next year, is that incorporated? What are your projections on passenger miles as you develop the budget? Are those pieces that we'll discuss in the next items?
And when we went through this, you know, we collaborated with this and Troy and Rusty whenever we went through the budget. So a lot of the factors are what we currently have as far as service right now, and what that was the foundation for the budget. Where are we at right now? So we'll focus on what our service level is right now, and then proceed forward with the budget for next year based off of that.
Passenger miles is a function of ridership. So keep that in mind. So whatever service level we put out as far as revenue service, passenger miles can increase or decrease based upon the numbers of passengers that we would bring in. So that's not a good line item to use for budgeting. Your budgeting would be based upon your service hours, revenue miles, those things that are absolute. So you know how many service hours you're going to put out, you know how many revenue miles you're going to put out based upon the distances you're driving on each route. So those are absolute, you know, numbers that you can calculate. Your passenger revenue miles is just a function of how many passengers can you carry throughout the service day, and that will fluctuate based upon, you know, individual daily service, and it'll fluctuate based upon you know, during the pandemic, it dropped off. Well, the reason it dropped off is because we started limited the number of passengers that could be on a bus for social distancing purposes. And so as those requirements are restricted and, you know, the number of people that you can get on a bus is restricted, then it decreases that revenue number or revenue passengers per revenue. And so you just have to go in there and look at that. You want your passenger per revenue mile to be as low as possible. But it's all a function of how many passengers you carry and when you can carry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say these are really the things we're talking about, cost per revenue mile is really a trailing indicator of the service that is designed and put on the street. So for the 2023 budget, the conservative assumption is that the service will look the same as it did in 2022 in terms of number of service hours that are needed to deliver the service. So what you're going to see, what we're going to talk about in the budget is this is reflecting just carrying over the same service. Our board, the DCT board will make a decision in July about what the service will be in fiscal year 2023. That will likely be a reduction to some level of the service that's out here today. And then when that happens, we are going to ask the NTMC board to ask HTG to provide an organizational structure and the bodies, the drivers who are necessary to deliver the service that the DCT board asked for. And that will change the budget for 2023. And that's the board, the DCT board will make that decision in July. And then we will be able to amend the proposed budget between July and its adoption in September.
So if I'm understanding it's all overall picture, the service level, according to what you just said, is going to remain, the service itself is going to remain for 23 as it was for 22.
That's it.
Looking at right now.
That's how we're budgeting because that's the most conservative, expensive assumption to make
Right.
for purposes of the budget.
And that makes sense. So we do that, know that that's going to be a constant, that service until they make another decision.
Until the board makes the service decision in July,
Right.
in which you will probably see that budget reduce, that service reduced to some extent, which should drive a commensurate reduction in the budget.
Right. But either way, at this point, it's going to be a constant. When they make another decision, there'll be another constant.
Correct.
But that service is going to be constant because you've got to have the routes, you've got to have the buses, you've got to have the driver. What could fluctuate is the passenger revenue, because that can go up and down depending on.
Correct.
How many people want it. That makes sense.
Correct.
And then what that does is at the end of that, it shows you what your cost for that passenger revenue is, because your service is going to remain level, but your revenue can come down, and that can show to the board and to the public what the cost is for providing this service. Correct. Okay. Maybe you have any more on that?
I have some additional questions that I think they're more appropriate for the budget.
Okay.
Item later.
I had one thing.
Yes, sir.
Just so you get some chair clarification on,
Thank you.
I'm Troy Rayleigh.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Clarification on PMT, what PMT is we do that every 3 years. We're required to do that. So these numbers are a little skewed. I wouldn't trust that because last time we did was in 2018, but because we were supposed to do it in 2021, but because of COVID, FTA suspended that. So that factor of how many passengers per mile is from 2018. So it's skewed a little bit. So I wouldn't factor in that into consideration when you're looking at how much cost per passenger mile. It's just not accurate right now, but that's what FTA uses as a benchmark. And so we will be doing sampling again year after next. And so, and part of the sampling process is someone actually has to ride the bus, count passengers when they get on, get off, how far they went between stops, and we have to calculate how many passenger miles each person rode.
Okay.
That's how that's done.
Thank you, Charlie.
I would definitely encourage you all to use kind of what as Paul mentioned, use the DCTA reports and that information is out there, because getting old data that even when it's presented, you're kind of saying, well, doesn't mean much, don't consider it, is difficult as far as metrics to present.
Well, I think pretty much so, except for the cost being increased. The data of the service itself hasn't changed that much. It's the ridership that has changed. Except for the increase of salaries and gas and stuff like that. The service itself has probably remained, the cost of the service itself has probably remained constant except with the inflation cost.
Service, so the service levels have, since 2018, have reduced the number of revenue hours that we put out there because service has been cut back a little bit. But overall, you're correct in what you're saying is that the service has stayed, fairly consistent. Other than the reduction of the few routes that have happened. But what Troy was talking about is the sampling. The feds require you to sample your passengers every 3 years. On DRS, we do 100% sampling, so we count, DRS is truly accurate, up to date, because it's done per passenger each time they get on, because one person gets on, they pay a ticket and they go. Fixed route, you may have 5 people get on, and it's, a driver can't calculate that, so you do a sampling every 3 years. So I don't use, as I said before, I don't use the passenger revenue miles as an indicator for the overall budget or anything like that. You use your absolute numbers for setting your budget up and all that kind of stuff, if that makes sense. And I hope that answered your question, Dean.
It does. Any other questions on that right now before we move on?
Let's
Go
go.
ahead.
If you flip a couple more pages, there's one called ridership comparison. And it's a graph looking, or I got 3 columns there. So is that like 18, 19, and 20, just so I know what those 3 columns are?
And this was taken from DCTA, so that's the annual ridership. So we don't have and we'll make sure that they're appropriately marked on here, like we have in some of the other graphs, but we'll make sure that those are done appropriately.
And is this the ridership for bus only, or for bus and rail?
No, this is just bus.
Bus. Yes.
And then across the bottom, I guess that RT2, it's Route 2, Route 3, Route 4, Route 5, 6, 7.
Correct.
Denton. What is the MK?
Monsignor King.
Okay. Yeah, if you could put a legend along the bottom here, just so we can know what those are. All right, so back to my general question was, we have all this data, what conclusions are we coming to?
Well, again, this is informational, it's to provide some discussion, illicit discussion, informative to the board. So just wanted to, again, just let the board know that there is other information out there, and to elicit discussion regarding fixed route, regarding the university service that's provided by NTMC, as well as access. And I think we accomplished that. There were a lot of questions regarding this, so just wanted to, again, make sure that the board knew that this information is out there, and that we will condense it going forward, but there is information out there. Should the board want to see other information that we can get a hold of and provide that at future board meetings.
Richard, also to add to that, I think that you'll notice that as ridership in a lot of areas was going up until COVID hit, and then ridership dropped off. And I think that if you look at it from that perspective, if you look at just Route 2, ridership was going up, and then service cuts happened, COVID happened, and ridership dropped off. And so I think if you look at it from that perspective, you can see that, that's pretty much across the board when you look at the different routes.
Okay, go a couple more pages down. It's a graph that looks like this one.
That is the overtime percent, and the last board meeting. So the 0.1 is going to be 10%. That's our average. That's what our goal is for overtime, is 10% or less. So for the blue,
And then it's overtime compared to base pay.
correct. And this is 2019 to current. So the blue is in June when NTMC took over. And then we move on to the orange for 2020. You can see the legend down at the bottom. gray for 2021, and then yellow for current year.
I think you, there are a couple more pages over. It's the missed run 12-month comparison.
Yes,
And missed run is like when a bus doesn't run the route it was timed to run.
it does not complete that run, correct?
Okay. And I was interested in that because you hear about the airlines canceling, 1,800 flights every day or something. So I was kind of wondering, how are we doing in the bus world compared to the airline world?
Right, they apparently are having the same issues as far as the flights go, the pilots, the crews. Having enough of that and NTMC is not avoidance of that. There are at times personnel issues, whether we misread the paddle and we start off at a different location. Things happen coming to work or other issues that we can't get that service out at that time, or there's just a personnel delay. So we have been watching this a lot more recently as far as the missed trips and getting the time off, making sure that the bus operators here on time. We still run into issues where they misread the document that they have in front of them called the paddle of where they start and the time. So we're monitoring that. However, we still encounter some issues with that, but dispatch has been doing a great job of monitoring the fleet through swiftly, and then also tightening up when the bus operators come in and if they misread the paddle, trying to get a different vehicle out there as another for the route to make sure that is not a missed trip. However, that it does happen.
Okay, so looking over here, June, I'm assuming down at the bottom, May, that's May 2022.
Correct.
And then the June up there would be 2021.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if I look in May, April of, I guess maybe it's May. Yeah. It says at UNT there, I see the number 53. Does that mean there were, what does that tell me?
That there were 53 missed runs during that month for missed trips.
And if you're the UNT route is getting students around the campus and the classes, stuff, how do they know there's going to be a missed trip so that they can make other arrangements?
So we send out rider alerts, and within that rider alert, what we've delved into whenever. So initially, if there's going to be a missed trip, a rider alert is sent out. So if I'm riding one of the UNT routes and it's Discovery Park and I get a rider alert that pops up on my phone notification that's a missed trip or that there's an operational issue. So I know what to expect, that vehicle is missed, it has a missed trip. But what we started doing is going into a little bit more detail. So if there is a missed trip, it has multiple vehicles on there, we denote what vehicle that is. So they can always go to the transit app and look at that, and then that vehicle. So it provides more clarity to the passengers as to what vehicle is going to be missed. So there, where I stand, it might be that the next bus is coming, but the one that's missed is starting at the beginning of the route. So I'm not going to be affected based on my location, but if I'm at the beginning of the route, then I know that I'm going to be affected and I'll need to wait for the next one, and I can check the transit app at that point.
And when we see the number like 53, then that's 53 out of how many?
53.
I mean, like, are we doing 200 trips a day and we missed 53 of 200, or we're doing 600? I was trying to get a sense for the percentage.
How many UNT runs are there in a month?
Yeah.
Total.
I will have to get that information, what that daily output is per route. And and we can break that down a little bit further. Also, it's 53, but what route was that on for UNT? So we can break that out a little bit more and provide some more clarity.
Thank you.
And when you have a miss, is that net like that 53? Is that necessarily the whole route was missed or just a stop or two in that route was missed?
That depends. So if it is a route that has one bus, then that's you didn't get service. If it's a route that has multiple buses on there, which it could be 2, it could be 4, then it's just depends on your location. But 3, 4 buses on there, it's frequent service. So you're going to be delayed. It just is a minimal delay at some point, where it could be 5 to 7 minutes. But if it's 1 or 2 buses, then that's more significant depending on the route. The headway, it could be a little bit longer than that.
I think it'd be good to see the comparison of how many routes are run versus how many are missed. Have one, Paul. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
And I certainly don't mean to belabor the point, but this will help me get ready for the budget conversations. You mentioned a few minutes ago that ridership was up before COVID. If I look at 2018 and 2019, passenger miles were down 18 to 19, were less in 2019 and 2018. I see that your service miles, your services supplied revenue miles were up in that time. So when you say ridership was up, what metric are you referring to?
I was looking at that graph on the previous page.
That showed all the routes.
Yes, sir. I was going based upon that. So I was looking at this, and when I was looking at it, I was comparing, it may be that overall. I'm sorry, it's agenda item number 3 continued. It's, I don't, but they're not numbered, so I can't tell you what slide it is. But when I look at this, when you look, I was looking at the individual routes. Overall ridership may have been down, but I was looking at the individual routes like Route 2, Route 3, Route 4. So when you look at overall service, there could have been changes on, somewhere that
Right.
reduced overall ridership. But when I was looking at my statement before, was based upon this.
That's great. So just to help me frame it, so understanding 18 and 19. Make sure I say it right. Passenger miles were down 18 to 19,
Yes, sir.
but the vehicle revenue miles were up. Does that just means there were more buses out, even though we had less ridership? Is that essentially what that means?
Yes, that's what that would mean. Your revenue miles are an absolute number. It's how many miles you're out there running, and your passenger miles are just a function of how many people.
Is that a
actually
red
ride.
flag when you have your service miles increase over a year, yet your passenger miles decrease?
It is, and a lot of that was related to the initial scares with COVID and then leading into the next year. So part of 2019, there was some COVID related issues, and then going into 2020, of course, COVID became a major issue.
Okay, thank you.
So.
And I thought on all this is, it's great to have this information. As our board, NTMC board, I think we are charged only with the fact of trying to produce the service that DCTA directs us to produce at the best possible cost with the best possible customer service. We are not charged with, do we run this route or do we run that route? Is it cost effective? Is that cost effective? That's a DCTA decision to make, if I'm not mistaken, or I understand. So basically what we're charged is we're given routes to do and they fluctuate. As we've seen the last couple of years, they're changing. But we're given to do that and our task is to make sure that we are operating the bus system the best we can for cost and service. Just with the route, because I understand what you're saying. Sometimes it doesn't make sense what it's costing us to provide the service, but yet that's not our thing that we can decide. That's DCTA's decision to decide, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that right, Counselor? Correct. So, and I'm not trying to do anything other than just remind us that we're just here to try to make sure that we're providing the best service and the service we're required to provide the best cost for the best service possible for our customers. Okay, go ahead.
On the 12-month comparisons for preventable and non-preventable collisions. It's this one. All right, there we go. There was a spike, as you can see, in August and September. But overall, the numbers are pretty good for the number of preventable collisions overall. And what we'll do on this is provide what the average is, a national average for preventable and non-preventable collisions, or more specifically for preventable collisions, and then what our percent is. So you can see what our rate is compared to national average. But this, it isn't, these aren't bad numbers at all.
That is a question for you too. Are we, is NTMC the one that regulates the rates or does DCTA? The fees charged for the service. DCTA does that.
You know about the fare that's
Yes.
paid? Yes, that's
DCTA
yes.
does that. So we just have to operate under whatever they're.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I don't have anything else to report, Chairman. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make one final comment on this before we leave it. I would like for Maurice, you and your team to work with Troy to develop a standard set of reports that tells a very concise story month to month on safety, service, and cost. On the safety side, we're reporting on the Go Zone service on an incident frequency ratio basis. So while this measures the number of incidents, we'd like to be able to baseline that against number of incidents against the number of miles in a graphical format that's really easy to read. The good news is that I think your KPI is 2 per 100,000 miles, and we're well below that at 0.39 per 100,000 miles. I've got a slide on that. So there's one slide on safety, and it's a graph that looks like this that says we're running very safe service overall. And so Troy can provide you, here's the view that we've got on the Go Zone service. It's also in the public board packet every month. So you can see that and say, okay, how do I mirror this data to match a similar sort of view? On the service side, there is something amongst all these graphs, there's something about on-time percentage and number of missed runs and all that sort of stuff by route. And how does that roll up to a view that we can easily digest? And I think you might be in the right direction with something like this, but just that puts that relative to how much service is on the road overall. And then the cost side probably, or ridership side, I'm sorry, can be had from the graphs that DCTA is already producing. And so you could get to a 3-slide snapshot in a board packet every month pretty easily just by maybe tweaking those two, the first two, the safety and the service part of it. I also would like to have a proposal from you on how to produce a daily ridership summary that says by route, here's the number of riders, and if there's a missed run, what were the missed runs and what's the reason? I get rider alerts on my phone and I see, this run was missed, this run was missed. It's really hard for me to see what's the trend. Whereas if I'm looking at a daily report that maybe has a cause as the reason why, then I can understand, okay, do we have a systemic problem or was just sort of an anomaly? Like it looked like Saturday was a pretty rough day for us on the service this past weekend. And I'm curious as to why. And so that daily report then rolls up to the monthly, which we have to produce anyway on the DCTA side. So just your thoughts on how we can accommodate that would be really great. Because I'm also asking for daily ridership reports on the rail side or bringing those to the forefront and the GOES side as well.
And we have an operational report, ops report that is completed by dispatch. So that denotes what happened with that trip.
Okay,
or What happened with the service.
okay,
So that's done daily, the completed daily.
okay.
So that information could be provided as well.
Yeah, so maybe just some way to roll that thing up. If it's a 3-page ops report, I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for what's the real meat and potatoes. Here's what happened and here's why. So, yeah, I'm interested in your proposal on that. Thank you.
Good discussion. Anything else you want to get before we move on? Okay, we've gone over all the backup information.
On ticket sales, that monthly total was 8,549. And then the last thing, I apologize, the last talking point on here is the NTMC standard operating procedures development. We are working internally on developing those SOPs and getting some clarity for each position. So I'll be reporting to the board each month on the SOP development and where we're at with that. So I just wanted to advise the NTMC board of that. That concludes my report.
You want any questions on those? Okay, we'll move to item B, 3B. We've kind of been discussing all this. It's kind of interlocking this North Texas Mobility Corporation bus operation overview and discussion. Does anybody have any questions on what you've got presented there? Before we go into the budget, we kind of incorporated that in the item A also. I didn't know if anybody else had anything else they wanted to go over.
Mr. Chair, I would
Yes.
propose that this item B has got a lot more to it than just the stuff that we went through. And it's not just about the metrics, but about kind of the options going forward. In the last meeting,
Right.
you all wanted to know, this board wanted to know, what's the DCTA board going to hear about their, yeah, is the DCTA board going to hear about alternatives and options for the bus service moving forward? So that's what this briefing is. So I'm happy to go through that. If you're-
Please.
Okay.
Please do. Thank you.
So I'll just let Keisha know and put the slide. Okay. So our DCTA board had a strategic planning workshop on the, what was it, June the 10th, I believe, the Friday, June the 10th. And one of the agenda items they requested was help the DCTA board understand NTMC, our contract with HTG, and what options exist for the bus service moving forward, recognizing that the DCTA board's in the process of developing a new service plan. And that they will make a decision on in July. So these slides are excerpts from that discussion. Okay, so provided this to just illustrate to them, because we have a couple of new board members as well who are getting oriented to NTMC. So provided this slide to say, what does NTMC do? It carries out the business of the bus operation. It has a contract with HTG to provide transportation management services. It also has the power to contract with DCTA, political subdivisions, units of government, other people, and other non-governmental entities for service on behalf of DCTA. So there's another feature there that we don't talk about a whole lot, but could be relevant and even more relevant in the future. Talked about the 5-member board and highlighted that there's a vacancy right now. Typically, the board positions on this board are appointed by our member cities in Denton County. The position that had been appointed by Highland Village is vacant. And I anticipate that we might get a nomination from Highland Village at some point in the near future, which would keep this board apprised of.
If you would let them know that To me, that's important because of the size of our board. I believe our quorum is 3.
Right.
And it's 3 present, correct? Not 3 can't be, you gotta
Yeah,
have
that's
3
right. You gotta be
here
present,
in
correct,
person, present.
That's correct.
So if it's down to 4, if we have 2 people that can't be out, we can't have a meeting. So
Right.
to me, I think we need to try to get that position filled as quick as possible, just to make sure we can have a quorum present.
Yes, sir. Understood. And I think that is the plan.
Okay, thanks.
So the board, NTMC prepares the budget, hires a general manager and engages with DCTA to provide services to NTMC. And I reference all of this from the bylaws and our contract with and NTMC's contract with HTG, all that sort of stuff, based on a quick study over the course of several weeks. So if anything I say it runs different than what you understand, then please let's speak up and get that resolved here now. So next page was to show them just how we got to this point that we used to operate, DCTA used to operate the bus service under an agreement with the First Transit Corporation. And in 2019, NTMC bylaws were approved. And then we transitioned to a consulting agreement with HTG to help DCTA learn how to operate a bus service. And then that turned into an agreement for a general manager, which then led to an agreement for transportation management services. And now we're on our second amendment of that contract, which expires on March of 2023. And that's an abbreviated version. There's a whole first iteration of this slide. There are a whole bunch more milestones in there, but this is the high level version that with all the salient points. So next slide, please. So this slide just articulates what is the division of responsibilities between NTMC and DCTA, because as I've come into the organization in November of last year, and now in this interim role, that's been a really open question in my mind is how does this division of responsibilities shake out? And had the chance to meet with Maurice and John and Troy in April, right after I came on as the interim, and say, okay, our first task is to understand who's supposed to be doing what so that we can minimize the potential for overlap and give everybody clarity on who's doing what part of this whole thing. So the way the interlocal agreement lays out, NTMC does the stuff that's in the column on the left and DCTA does the stuff that's in the column on the right. I highlighted for the DCTA board that the items in black or in the bold italics, like facility maintenance, data collection and reporting, human resources, payroll, benefits, oversight, budget, maintenance, compliance, and maintenance of SOPs are places where we see the most potential for additional clarity between DCTA and NTMC, because there's a lot of work being done by both sides, particularly in those items. And so then when we look at the scope of work on the transportation management services contract, provide a general manager who reports to the NTMC board of directors. So that's helpful clarity to understand that if the DCTA wants anything to happen with the HTG contract, it is the job of the board, this board, to provide that direction and feedback and input into HTG, kind of like what's happened this morning with regard to this reporting and all that sort of stuff. Highlighted for the board the fact that under the contract, the general manager could be assigned to other transit systems that are managed by the contractor at times, and just highlighted also that there is, in some places, the GM job description says the GM reports to the director of DCTA bus operations, but that had been superseded by the latest direction that the GM reports to this board. I think it's just an evidence of the evolution of this organization over time. So next slide. So we were talking a lot about standard operating procedures. Troy and Maurice are well engaged in this, and these SOPs are really designed to provide a user's manual per se for our bus operation. This is how NTMC delivers the bus operation. The next level after SOPs is, okay, now who does what within those SOPs? But before we can get to that point, we got to get together, okay, what are the standard operating procedures? Those standard operating procedures are dictated by the agreement and the ILA that we have with HTG and NTMC to be delivered when the contract was executed. They're incomplete at this point, but like I said, Maurice has been well engaged to get those things resolved. I think that is priority one. I communicated to the DCTA board that is priority one for the organization to move forward, because again, that is the means by which we deliver this service. And today it's understood, but it's not defined, if that makes sense. Next slide. This slide just provided the DCTA board an overview of the NTMC organization and the budget in terms of FY22 budget and full-time employees and technical roles that they undertake. And at the bottom of the slide, we point to the fact that with the July service change, there is an opportunity to rationalize that the NTMC organization and budget to what is the service that's on the street and really evaluate both of those pieces very carefully. So under the current operation, we show the table that says, here's the number of vehicles and here's the number of operators required for the service and this as it is today. And then in the July service adjustment, you see UNT and access stay the same because we don't expect any changes to that. But on the connect service, you see that it could go from 7 vehicles to anywhere from 4 to 10 or plus or minus 3 vehicles. And then on the operator side, it could drive the need for only 6 to 15 operators. So you might reduce by 12 or you might reduce by 3. And so what I think Troy and I and Maurice have already kind of huddled up and say, hey, anticipate if you're watching DCTA board meetings, you're seeing what are the alternatives that are out there for the service. Anticipate that this change is coming and begin to have this conversation among yourself now about how does the NTMC organization reflect the service that's on the street. Make sense? Okay, next slide. Here's a picture of the revenue fleet, and a bus is not a bus, is not a bus. And so we don't want to assume anything. So we say here's the for the connect service, or the UNT service, or the paratransit service. Here's the number of vehicles that we have on each one of those. As we go into the service change, that this also could be up for consideration as to whether how many large buses are required on the service versus the small buses. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide. This slide outlines again what the board asked for in terms of alternatives. There were a few alternatives that I presented with the DCTA board meeting that didn't really have much traction. They were there for kind of academic discussion purposes only. So these are the alternatives out of the discussion with the board that DCTA staff has been asked to evaluate, and therefore we will need to ask for NTMC's and HTG's help to evaluate these as well. The first alternative is under status quo, where NTMC is soliciting a contract for transportation management services, but there's this idea of a turnkey contract for transportation management services. And what we mean by that is a contract in which there is one invoice produced a month and one invoice paid a month to deliver the bus service for DCTA. What we have now is a number of invoices and a number of transactions on the human resources and payroll side to purchase of parts and any other number of things that is part of the reason for the overlapping of responsibilities in those key areas that are defined by SOPs. As a contrast, on our rail side, for instance, we own the trains, but we hire Rio Grande Pacific, who purchases parts, hires people, pays their people, all that sort of thing, and they give us an invoice a month on a contract that's been defined for a period of time. And so it's a much cleaner division of responsibility. Make sense? So that's number one. Number two is outsourcing the bus operation through the ending of the interlocal agreement with NTMC for bus ops, and alternative A, they are outsourcing bus ops and maintenance to a regional partner like Trinity Metro. This was an idea that surfaced first time a couple of years ago that our board has asked us to take up again and evaluate interest from Trinity Metro on their willingness or ability to do that. Or DCTA could terminate the ILA with NTMC and directly solicit its own turnkey contract for bus operations. And then finally, the last alternative is termination of the ILA with NTMC and then bringing the NTMC organization into the DCTA organization. Obviously, the NTMC organization was stood up in anticipation of cost savings and efficiencies that could be realized. Anything that would proceed in this alternative would obviously require significant financial analysis and a pro-con analysis to say, does this make sense and why or why not? What are the risks? All that sort of stuff. So again, DCTA staff has been asked to evaluate these alternatives and then develop some recommendations. All of these alternatives require the current HTG contract to be extended for some period of time because there's a lot of work to do and it isn't going to get done before March of 2023. The other note, the note at the bottom of the slide is also important that the DCTA board could preserve NTMC in order to enable providing of services, contract services to non-member cities. For instance, we provide contract services to the city of Capel, the city of Frisco, and this organization could have value in the delivery of those services as a means to cleanly differentiate those services from our DCTA services.
Couple of questions I got on is on the item 2, the outsource. How would A be different from B? If you're, I mean, you're looking at doing a turnkey under A, I would think also.
Yeah, it is, you're right, the main difference might be the degree or the nature of the solicitation required.
It just seems to me that if they're going to outsource it, they would want to do it complete turnkey, because if you're going to have someone else manage the outsource, then you're creating another problem. To me, that seems like
Right.
kind of what we're doing now.
Yeah,
Similar thing. So that I understand that. And then the other one was when you're talking about the service to the other areas, what are they? What is DCTA's vision on that? Do you know? Or is there any?
that's a great question. And this maybe could be the topic of a future agenda item, that our board right now is in the process of developing its mission and strategic objectives moving forward. And no real definition yet on what that looks like, but the major themes are ridership and enabling DCTA to deliver value across Denton County and the region. And so the places where we provide service outside of our member cities, like Capel, Frisco, provide a model by which we could have a focused effort to begin to develop other relationships in that regard to provide the services that communities might need. For instance, we've been asked to go to Flower Mountain on July 18th and provide an overview of the Go Zone service and what other tools are in the DCTA toolkit to help the town of Flower Mound consider how they help make their residents move out, or the people who are needed to work in the places that serve their residents. And so those are the types of things, those are the types of conversations we're envisioning.
Okay. And then one thing I wanted to just remind everyone that you briefly mentioned it, but the current contract that we have with Hickson Group does expire in March.
Right.
So that's why he was mentioning earlier that all of this, whatever we decide to do, because of the time frame, is going to look at some type of extension or renewal of that contract.
Correct.
Okay.
Just for some amount of time. So what follows is a number of
One more.
oh, yeah, sure.
On those outsourcing. At one time, there was looking at doing something with for via, whatever came of that.
Well, so VIA provides our Go Zone service. We had a conversation with Fort Worth Trinity Metro about operating the bus service and doing the maintenance, and I've got a little bit of more information on that. So the next few slides are just really high level schedules, probably too aggressive for what reality is, but I was trying to tie them to some extent to that March 2023 deadline on the expiration of the HTG contract. And so in this first, and what you'll see in all of these alternatives is that they require the completion and adoption of the SOPs and the division of responsibilities, because that really becomes the scope of work for what this contract is going to be. So I will be very interested in the timely completion of those, and Maurice and I have already talked about that as has Troy and as has John from our April meeting. Then followed by, okay, how do those responsibilities divide out in the event that we take a different course. Right. Makes sense. So in this first option, what you see is in the first couple of months, that 2-month timeline review division of NTMC DCTA responsibilities, that's the SOPs. DCTA board makes a service change decision in July 28th. This board ought to consider taking up the results of the service change impacts and how that reflects on the NTMC organization, like I talked about before in that budget and staffing slide. And then if the board were to choose this, the DCTA board would choose this alternative, it's a minimum of 6 months for DCTA staff to prepare a solicitation. And then you see that would, assuming that went off in 6 months, then we'd need at least 2 months of changeover between the new contractor and HTG, so that would require an extension of that HTG contract. Make sense? The next slide is the alternative about terminating the ILA and turning it over to Trinity Metro and DART. Again, same thing on the front end about SOPs and division of responsibilities. This allots 6 months for DCTA and Trinity Metro to reach some sort of an agreement on how the bus operation is delivered, what that contract looks like. Again, that feels pretty aggressive. But if we got to that point, then the DCTA board could approve that agreement in March of 2023. And then the ILA with NTMC takes 180-day notice before it can terminate. And so that would drive a 6-month changeover between HTG and Trinity Metro to transfer the service. Any questions there? Okay, the next slide shows a little bit about the DCTA and Trinity Metro conversation so far. That it was last summer that DCTA and Trinity Metro staff started talking about this cooperative agreement, but it has not proceeded. But the two agencies did sign an ILA that allows the purchase of light goods and services to help with pricing and all that sort of thing. So there's 3 main concepts or reasons why we might consider outsourcing to Trinity Metro or another regional partner, and it's around parts purchasing, technology sharing, and then the outsource of the ops and maintenance function. But every one of those has different items that need to be resolved or explored. Like on the parts side, what is the potential for parts savings? Because what is our fleet going to look like following the service change? So we really need to know that. On the technology side, our route structure is going to drive the need for technology, and their platform may be more, their technology platforms may be more robust than what is required by DCTA. And then when we think about ops and maintenance, we have different unions than they do. And there's also this idea that there's some sort of upfront money that's needed in order to start the operation. And the two agencies will need to resolve how DCTA avoids putting money at risk and how Trinity Metro doesn't take on cost on behalf of DCTA without money from DCTA. So there's a conversation to be had there.
When we're looking at the comparisons we talked about earlier, like regionally, or might one of the columns be Trinity Metro, so we can compare.
You
what
mean
is
in
our
terms of
cost per mile?
in terms of performance?
Yes.
It could be. I mean, I think that, yeah, Maurice laid out and John laid out, there's a number of places where we could benchmark off of.
Okay.
So then option two, alternative B, terminating the ILA and having DCTA solicit that turnkey contract. Again, a couple of months on SOPs and division of responsibility, 6 months on procurement, and then the termination of the ILA would take at least 6 months. So there's an extension of the contract there. And then finally, the integration of the termination of the ILA and integrating NTMC into DCTA. The major lift there would be the financial analysis and the policy decision by the DCTA board as to whether or not this was viable and preferable. And so that's really what's happening on the front end. Still, we want to understand the SOPs because our DCTA board needs to understand what does it take to deliver a bus service. That'll help them and be informed on, okay, what's the staffing look like to support the DCTA operation and the NTMC operation. And then the soonest we would get to that is January of next year. 6 months of changeover would mean an extension of the HTG contract of about 4 months. So again, all of these are the alternatives that we've been asked to present. All of them are very aggressive timelines. Provided for the purposes of the conversation and to illustrate that the HTG contract will need to be extended to some amount. As we get more into these, certainly we'll bring back additional details for how the conversation is progressing. Any questions on those alternatives?
That's a great report. I think we needed to hear that because I know there's a lot of transitioning going on with DCTA right now as to where we want to look at. It's been going on for a couple of years now, but it does seem like they're making some progress. It's good to see kind of an outline of what they're looking at right now, which helps us as what we need to look at going forward for the teaching contract or whatever. When we talk about benchmark comparison cities, to me, Dallas and maybe Fort Worth and Metro are not really good comparisons. Dark and pretty Metro. Does Arlington, Irving, I think Longview, I think some other cities, Garland, do they all operate? Well, I know Longview, but do Irving, Arlington, and Garland all operate under dark, pretty Metro?
Those are enclave cities. And so some of those don't provide, they just provide demand response. So some of those areas are would be a challenge to get any type of comparison out of it. So there's enclave cities up here that don't participate in the DART program. I think what we could do is probably pull, like, if you're looking at comparable cities, when you're looking at bus operations, you could pull something from like Lubbock, Waco. You know, we could pull Laredo's a little bit bigger than DCTA. We could pull some, you know, comparison data from some of those areas that I think would make sense whenever you look at the size of the fleet and the amount of ridership that you have. And I think that those would make better comparisons than something from like the T or DART or something like that. But I think as Mr. Hayes said, I think the T or well, Trinity Metro would be one that you could look at just as a comparison as far as cost to see if that makes, you know, if there would be, you could probably see some benefit or some economy of scale there.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any other questions or comments on this?
So how do we know which of these alternatives we're gonna do?
That's the work ahead of us.
That's the question.
That's the work ahead of us.
And Mr. Christine, I really appreciate you doing this. I know I asked her for the last meeting, she prepared this for us. I certainly do appreciate it. Very concise, and I appreciate that. And informs us, kind of helps us look at questions that, I mean, gives us some answers on some questions we didn't have any answers for. So, great.
Yes, sir, you're welcome. And I think that the board will, well, I know that the DCTA board will make a decision on service in July. And I anticipate that will help settle out the question of what does bus service look like at DCTA for a significant period of time. Now, one of the things that we asked that was requested in our budget was a long-range service plan, funding for a long-range service plan that would really be designed to say, okay, how do all of our different modes deliver whatever is the ridership goal that the board is going to set for a 2030 time horizon.
Right.
And so we'd anticipate the bus service to be part of that, assuming that the board makes a decision next month that features bus service moving forward, which all the alternatives that are presented have some level of bus service in them. And so that will provide a degree of certainty, I think, for planning purposes in this group and in a lot of other groups that will be helpful moving forward.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Okay, these last two slides really quickly are just other slides that we shared about. There's been conversation in the public and in our meetings about comparisons between fixed route and go zone service. And so this is about what's the difference between onboarding and training and recurring training and on the road accountability, all that sort of thing. So we provided that as a high level overview. And then the last slide is a concise summary of key KPIs on service quality and reliability. And what I would like to see our agency get to is a very concise presentation that the public can see very easily as to how we are performing in terms of our service delivery and our safety performance. And so when I asked earlier about Maurice, the idea of getting to what does that concise summary look like for the bus service? This is what that's pointed to. Because we have it, you just have to find it, and it's not front and center to all of us all the time. And if we're really about safety and service and ridership, these things need to be imprinted in our minds because we see them on a regular basis in places that are easy to find all the time.
On that slide there, some of the things I don't understand, and I get in there, man, because that really doesn't involve us as DCTA. A couple of questions on the goes on, but that's okay.
Okay.
Never mind.
If no other questions, that's the end of my report.
Thank you again, sir. I really appreciate it. Okay, next item we're gonna go to is item C, 3C, discussion North Texas Mobility Corporation proposal fiscal year operating budget. And everyone's given this. Mr. Crowe, do you want to go over that with us, please, sir?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. For the budget calendar, as you can see here, well, I won't go through all of this, but there are specific months in here that the board is going through and reviewing formal budget presentation, public hearing, August. So you can see the general outline of the budget calendar here. And we want to proceed to the next one. This is the next slide, has a lot to do with what Paul just went over with in regarding to the relationship between DCPA and NTMC and who does what right now. And again, that gets back to the SOPs and standard operating procedures and what we're doing on some of these. So any questions about the relationship? I know we've been over that a couple of times already today. Go to the next slide, what the change in the net position is on the bottom right for the budget is 160,668 going into for the 2023 budget. And on the next slide has the staffing level review, and that breaks down the FTE count, salaries and benefits for FY 2022 and 23 as a comparison. Any questions regarding that? We'll move forward.
What's the, on that item, what is the major increase for the outsourcing service and charges? Outsourced service and charges. That's the base of the increase. What does that entail?
That's the outsourcing services related to employment.
So that includes your salaries and that including your salary and wages in, or?
The outsourced services and charges. We've got, if you look back up on the previous slide, outsourced services related to employment, recruitment, advertising, payroll processing, pre-employment screenings, and legal services. There is a significant cost for Kronos, and as far as recruitment, advertising, trying different outlets, different avenues for recruitment of personnel, and also going to whether that's member cities or civic organizations for recruitment.
We're just looking at going down through the, and I see what that covers all that, but going down through there, if you look at it, we had a basically 140,000 increase from 20 to 21, then only a 50,000 increase 21, 22, but then now another 160,000 increase or 155, something like that, thousand increase for 23. Is there any one of those particular items that's causing that increase more than others, or is it just kind of a combination of them all?
That's just, in going through that, and Troy, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just the increase in services that we've experienced and going through the budget when we discussed it is if we're lower on one budget item, then this is compensating for that and increasing the appropriate line item for this.
I would, just looking at what all that includes, I would think that you're gonna have some, to me, it probably, the most of it was probably advertising cost increase. Is that correct on that?
We have had a significant increase in advertising costs, yes, for.
Because when you look at the other things, those are pretty standard. I mean, your payroll processing, including farm screenings and your legal service, those, I know they increase, but the advertising to me seems to have fluctuated. Have we ever looked at doing I don't want to spend a lot of money on this, I certainly don't want to hire a consultant for it, but looked at how effective our change in our advertising has been as far as ridership? Has it helped? I know you probably can answer because you haven't been here that long, but I don't know.
That would be something that DCTA would take up is in our marketing budget, and that is something that we actually have a focus on in our 23 budget around a strategic marketing and advertising initiative to understand what's the right message you're putting out and how we can get results to support it. Because
So
of
are
that.
they paying for that or we paying?
That's in the DCTA budget.
Well, it shows here that we got. It shows here that we're recruitment and advertising.
I think that is for hiring of people.
Oh, okay.
Right.
It's not. Okay, I misunderstood.
That's just for recruitment purpose.
Okay,
All your websites, everything costs dramatic
okay,
to solicit. Employers,
okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. Thank you.
On the next slide, the building of the bus operations budget. I do want to make a note here. Appreciate the communication between both entities, DCTA and NTMC, on building this. We've worked together on building it and coordination. So appreciate that and we really got a lot accomplished by doing that. So we're appreciative of that. As you can see here under the building operations budget, operating expenses, what those are for each category. I won't go through all of those, but you can take a look at the operating expenses there. On the next slide, under operating expenses, the NTMC bus, 7.4 million. And again, we get down to the increase of 160,668 going into 2023. And as Paul mentioned in July, that has potential to either increase or decrease based on the DCTA board and what they would like to see in the service levels going forward for the next year.
But with the elimination of some routes, shouldn't there be a savings? We're going to $1,000,001. That maybe we're making the wrong calls, but our budget for 2022 was $6,000,003. And now our proposed budget is $7,000,004.
So under operating expenses, the NTMC FY22 working budget, 7,263,989. And then the NTMC FY23 proposed budget is 7.424. Yeah.
Still, we're reducing services.
Well,
compared to where we were, aren't we?
we're for 22 and 23, those, the level going into 23 is based on 22 service levels. So if in July those service levels change, then the budget will change to accommodate that modification going forward in July.
Right, there's an assumption here that the service will remain the same between 22 and 23 until the DCD board makes the service change decision in July. At which time these numbers will be changed.
Yeah, but we already eliminated the bus routes. Couple bus routes.
Right.
And so I'm not seeing how we enjoyed any or heard any savings from that.
That's the open question on the DCTA side as well.
It was budgeted for 63, I think what they're saying, we budgeted 63, and we ended up paying 73. Right, with reduced routes.
Yeah,
It's what the incurred actual budget was for 22, not what the proposal for 23 is. Is what your question?
Yeah.
Well, I get that point, but it seems to me we're gonna be eliminating some overtime because we're not in the COVID. And we've eliminated bus routes. So in my brain, I'm thinking there ought to be a reduction in operating costs.
With the
Can I answer that, Maurice? So if we remember, if we go back a year ago, the budget was not budgeted at the appropriate level. They thought there would be more service cuts, then we had to add money back in. And so there was some fluctuations on the budget from that perspective. So the budget that was put together showed less routes. Is that correct, Troy? Less employees, less routes.
That is correct.
And so then we had to,
Anticipated a December stoppage of service.
correct.
We didn't realize we extended and actually extend Louisville up to some point, but it's hard to compare the two because last year's budget was a little off because we anticipated changes that didn't happen. And also you're also realizing an increase in your benefits as well.
Yeah. So that was the second point. So we had that change, and then we increased for COVID, we did some additional pays and different things like that, and then our benefits had increased as well. And so those are the differences. And then also, if you look at the outsourced services and charges, that includes the HTG contract that used to be in the, I would assume in the line just above. So that was the change from a couple of years ago. And so that's why there's some additional funds there. And we included some additional positions into that category as well. Yes, sir.
You also have the COVID payments.
Okay.
So when in July, I believe it is, DCHA is going to make some decisions. In looking at that and changing our budget, if we will, be sure, and I'm sure you'll do this reminder, but be sure, while we may save some driving hours and driver's time, we may still have to keep a similar I want to use the buses, use parts and services of the buses. The hard part, kind of like the computer, the hard drive, you're going to have to maintain. You're probably not going to see any service, any savings unless you cut services drastically on that hard part of it. You will on some of the driver's side, as far as having buses and the parts and the people working on the buses and all that. I don't know that you get that much of a cost saving.
Yeah, I'll expect that we'll ask HTG to look at the entire organization and understand for what's on the road, what is required on the ops side and the administrative and overhead side. Also relative to the standard operating procedures that are being developed in the division of responsibilities.
Right. And with that, we probably need to look at, once they make this decision, what are our resources that we have as far as buses, parts, operators, the service people that do all that portion of it. And see where will we stand? Are we going to need, I don't know how old our buses are we gonna need to, if we're gonna continue service, are we gonna be looking at replacement vehicles, or what are we gonna need to do? So we kind of need some type of a formula for DCTA to have. So if they decide for us to keep it there, then we know what we need going forward.
One other question. It seems surprising that your average operator rate would decrease from 22, considering the labor market and inflation. Is that, how was that derived on how you estimated the operator rate?
Increase in the number. I think that's what they're trying to say, decrease from 2022 average range for operators. So they were saying that it's not the wage, it's the number of operators that we needed. Because I think originally they were looking at around 70-ish operators, and now we're down to what Maurice has put.
So how does the rate compare to?
The rate is regulated by the CBA because they are union operators, and I promise you, it doesn't go down each year. And the benefit side of it, that's one of the sides that have been a huge challenge over the last couple of years is the benefit side as far as health insurance and things of that nature. So when you look at this operating expense budget, if they move forward with doing like a turnkey, this budget here doesn't include really all of the expenses. And so the expenses would actually increase if they did a turnkey budget, because you would put all the maintenance parts in there, you would put all of the fuel in there, all of the oils, all of the lubricants. And then, of course, depending upon how turnkey they go, if there's maintenance of facilities and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of things that this budget here looks at just the employee side of it, basically. And it's not any of those other costs that are sitting out there, like payroll and all those other things, because DCTA currently performs all of those services in-house, correct?
That's correct, but it would be up to the proposing contractor to develop an overall cost structure for delivering everything.
Right.
And so I think you got to look at it in totality.
Yes.
Yeah, the overall number may go up, but, well, I don't know that I'm willing to even concede that point, honestly, because I don't know that a turnkey contractor would propose the organization structure that we have in place right now.
Does DCTA own all of the facilities and infrastructure and buses and parks and all that stuff, or does NTMC own part of it?
DCJ owns all of that.
They own all that.
Yes. The parts, we pay for the parts as well, we order them. So it's our cash. So.
DCP, when you say we DCTA. Thank you.
Are there any economies of scale joining in with another organization?
You mean in terms of the Trinity Metro opportunity? Potentially, but we need to understand what our fleet is going to look like and what our service is going to look like, and what the value proposition is for the other party as well. So that's part of the evaluation to be done. The theory is that, yes, there are economies of scale, but we would have to bear that out once we have a service design in front of us.
And going back to your original kernel of the history. The theory, the reason NTMC was formed was in theory to deliver the same service at less cost. I think somehow we didn't do that. As it turned out, that was hope and goal.
And that could be the way that this plays out. I'd withhold judgment officially until we can do the analysis.
Well, we all know that we formed in 19. So we've had all of 19, 20, 21, and now we're in the 22.
Agreed, but there's been a lot of changes to the service over the course of that time period. A lot of things that happen when we go through that amount of change in that amount of time that maybe would be abnormal cost drivers that we wouldn't see going forward potentially. So certainly we can make a judgment on the numbers that are in the books, there's probably differences of opinion as to why those numbers reflect the way that they do. But we want to look forward following a July service change.
They're not critical of that. I'm just look at whatever business model we're gonna use moving forward. Taking into account the experience that we've had when we're looking at our various options, what I was asking earlier, how we decide which option. Seemed like that's a pretty important part of the puzzle.
Agree.
Anyone else have any questions on the budget as presented to us? Entertain a motion to approve the budget as presented.
I don't know, we're taking action.
No, just discussions.
Oh, I thought we were gonna take action today. No?
Yeah, the budget won't be adopted until September, and we need to have a hearing. Right with that, public hearings, and we need to have the service decision to see how the budget will adjust.
Right. But we have to have, don't we have to approve some type of proposal? Not actually approve the budget, but something that we want to approve for DCTA to look at. And then we would adjust that based on the decisions they make after that. I mean, how they gonna know what we're looking at for a budget if we don't give some kind of.
What we did last year.
Well, I mean, that's what happened. The staff, so NTMC staff proposed a budget to DCTA staff, and again, few months into this thing, I am, so NTMC staff proposed a budget to DCTA staff and a budget working session. DCTA staff took that budget proposal to the DCTA board for our budget workshop last week. With the understanding that the budget that was presented was assuming the same amount of service. The direction was, once the service change is made, bring back a revised budget. Now, if this board would like to direct HTG to provide its budget proposal to the board for review before it comes to the DCTA staff, then it seems like that would be a reasonable approach. If this board wants to have authority on what the budget looks like before it goes to DCTA, then this board ought to direct the general manager to bring a backup budget proposal for the revised service. Now, how that works out, just thinking out loud, how that works out in terms of concurrent timelines with the DCTA board may be kind of wonky unless this board wants to do a special called meeting. If it turns out that the DCTA board needs the budget proposal before you all do it.
Are there concerns with what was presented today?
That, I guess that was what my thought was. We needed some type of a consensus that this board is okay with this budget proposal to go to DCTA to determine if they want to approve it or not. That was my thought.
I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense to me.
Because if we're not even, I mean, it's our budget.
Yeah.
And if we're not in agreement on this budget, we don't care what DCTA is, because we're not gonna approve the budget, right? Isn't that right?
And although this is a discussion item, I think there needs to be a consensus that you have to take it forward, so.
That was what I'm. So I guess we can just say, does anyone have any problems or concerns with this particular budget as presented? If not, if you do, please let us know. If not, then we will provide this to the DCTA board as a budget that we are in consensus okay with.
Right, except for this budget's already been presented to the DCTA board. That's where I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
So why did we say, no, we're not gonna do this budget?
Does anyone have any issues with the budget?
Yeah. So here's the good news. The good news is that we have another shot at this because we all know this budget is not the final budget because there's a service change to be made. But Mr. Chairman, I think your instinct is correct that
Good work.
the NTMC board ought to say yes to a budget proposal that then goes to the DCTA board, your budget for adoption, because it is your budget.
Right.
That would require this board to direct NTMC staff to bring back a revised budget proposal.
I don't want to cause anybody a lot of extra work, so I don't guess we need to do this since it's already been done the other way.
Well, the work has to be, no, the revision has to be done.
No, I'm not talking about the revision, I'm talking about this.
Oh, right.
Right now.
Yeah, that wouldn't be productive.
Right. As long as everyone's okay with this, that's fine. When they do make their revisions on service, whatever they decide, they may not make a revision. If they do change it, then we would need our staff to come up with a revised proposed budget for us to approve, then to submit to DCTA.
Correct.
All right, so
Sorry about that.
let me ask you a question then.
That makes sense to you?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
David, you had something?
I was only gonna say, I think there is would be a lot more discussion at that point anyway, if we're just carrying on the 2022 service levels right now. Seeing how staff reacts to the changes in service level, what that looks like operationally, I think it's more fruitful discussion anyways.
Yeah. So I would suggest then that HCG staff look at the calendar and understand what the DCTA budget calendar looks like. And then say, when do I as HTG need to bring a budget proposal to my board? And give yourself plenty of time to get that through this board. So that the DCTA board can adopt the budget in time.
Right.
And if you started tomorrow, you wouldn't be starting from a blank page because there's a range of alternatives that are out there that you could plan against and say, well, if it goes this way, then this is the budget. If it goes this way, then this is the budget. And really, the org chart, in my mind, is going to drive a lot of that.
So it's clear in my head. Look at the slide here, 784. This is a continuation of what we're doing right this minute.
Correct.
Okay. For a whole year. And I turn back to this page on the expiration of the service agreement with HTG. When we execute one of these alternatives here, these three alternatives don't exist in this.
Correct.
But
So this alternative would drive a budget amendment at that time.
okay, thank you.
And just to. If we were actually digging into the budget right now, my question would be. Are we not, if we're even continuing the same service levels in this budget, we're not projecting any increase in cost with the new contract from April through September?
Yeah, 160,000.
Based on the new contract?
Well, that's a really good, so that's a really good point. So if the contract has to be extended. And if HTG is going to say, well, that new contract is going to cost more money than the current contract, then that ought to be reflected in the budget. So
Just a preview of a question I would have.
because the assumption is right now, because our assumption right now is that there is no change to the cost of the service based on just rolling it over.
We should. Okay. So in essence, where everyone's okay with this budget as or going forward, the way things stand right now for DCJ to look at, then once they give us a operation for the calendar year, is it calendar year 2023 or what, how does that work?
It's October.
It's gonna run October 1 to September 30th.
Once they, and then hopefully in July, we're talking about they'll give us a clarification of how it will run from October 1 of 22 to
September
September
30.
31 or 30th of 23.
Correct.
Then we can get more precise. Any other comments or questions? A little awkward. I've never had a budget quite work like this. We're in awkward times, I guess. Okay, so and nothing else. Moving forward, we'll go ahead and go with the presentation of the NTMC staff spotlight. So, Mr. Pearl, would you go over that with us, please, sir?
Yes, sir. I'll defer that to Renee. Nolan. She's on.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, wonderful. So we have Brittany Hartfield. She is actually fairly new to the NTMC group. She is our access scheduler. And she handles the paratransit scheduling and the on-demand scheduling for Frisco. She jumped in feet first and took off running. She has been a wonderful asset. She fills in everywhere she is needed, and continuously learns to grow the department and make changes as needed, and has developed a good communication between the customer service teams and the dispatch team. So she has been an absolutely wonderful asset and has continued to show that growth is needed and we can work with this. Yeah, so I just really wanted to spotlight her. There are many others on the team that are great, but in a short amount of time, she really got on board. And that's all I
Well,
got
thank
for
you
her.
very much. Thank you very much, and we appreciate Ms. Hatfield. We certainly appreciate Hartfield, I apologize. We certainly appreciate all the effort and the works that you do, and then coming in at a time when we were short-staffed and struggling through the COVID, you've come in, from what I understand, and done a great job in filling in at many different positions. And we greatly appreciate that, because I believe, and I think we all believe, that without good customer service, we're not going to exist. Nothing without good customer service will continue to exist. We appreciate your work in that area and all that you've done. And I'm sure that funnels down to all the people that you work with. So we appreciate it greatly.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, the question was asked before, if I may interject here, about the number of runs that we have or trips that are performed on UNT campus. So we had the 53 that Vice Chair Hayes noted for missed trips, and we have 184 runs a day, and there are 5,520 per month. So of the 5,520, we missed 53
okay.
for UNT service.
So about 1%. Yeah. I was gonna say 10, so not about 1%.
That's fantastic.
Right. And that's what's good shows up, I think, is that comparison that we're performing at 1%, which is good. Thank you for that information.
Sir.
Does anyone have anything that we need to go to executive session for? If not, we will move on to future board meetings agenda item. I know once again, Mr. Christina, you're going to bring us back some information from DCTA for the next board meeting. And I believe there was something else that you had said that you thought would be good. Oh, yes, the instruction for Henderson Group to come back with some item. There was 3 items. You remember?
Yeah, the concise summary of what is a recurring safety and service report that we can do, and integrating the ridership metrics that DCJ is already doing into this report.
Great. If you would you mind getting together with them and make sure we get that done in a way that.
Sure, happy to collaborate. Maurice knows how to get a hold of me and Troy, and he talk pretty regularly.
Okay.
So thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
And I need to let y'all know I'm out of country during the next meeting, so I will not be here.
Okay.
So it'd be
That
important
means
to
that
get
all
that other
3 of
position-
us will have to be here on site
Get the other position filled.
unless they can fill the position at their board meeting. And is that going to be a board meeting that you're talking
Well,
about?
the earliest it'll get filled is the July board meeting for DCTA, which happens
Which
after
is
this one.
After this one.
Yeah.
So all 3 of us will need to be here in person.
I tend to be here every day.
I figured. To that point, I will not be here for the August board meeting. So I will be at a conference for the August board meeting. But we should have that other position filled by then. And if something happens and one of you can't be here for the next board meeting, if you'll let us know ahead of time. Counselor, how much time do we need to do to change the date on a board meeting? 72 hours?
Yeah, I mean, just long enough for it to be posted, and we just check out bylaws real quick. I don't think we changed that, right? We had a standing.
We had a stadium for fourth Wednesday of each month, but I thought we changed it where we could make it, we can adjust it if needed. So that's why I was saying, if something comes up, and it could.
It's gonna be the 72-hour notice time. In order to post it.
Or you could do a fix the time to which to adjourn, that is the non-quorum convenes. Discovers you don't have a quorum, and then make a motion to fix the time to which to
Correct.
adjourn at another time.
So I guess the point is, one of us could get sick or something, you don't know, but if something happens, let us know, we'll post it and change the meeting. Is that all right? Okay.
And with our change of board members, we used to have a contact sheet with everybody's like phone numbers and emails and addresses. An update on that would be helpful, because I don't have Paul's number or David's.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Maurice, if you could get that to us, have that sent out, that'd be good. Anything else on the next? board
Yeah,
meeting?
and we did change, because it used to be designated by resolution, and then we took that out. So we no longer have the time and place and date set by resolution, so we have that flexibility now.
Would it be better to look at changing next month's board meeting?
Decide that now.
That's what I'm thinking. You know, when
Well,
you,
I'd rather be on the 20th, come back August 2nd.
for July 20th, we're scheduled for the 27th. So we could leave it as is. Let me ask this. If DCTA makes their decision on the July meeting, when is it, the 10th, did you say?
Be July 28th.
No, but I mean, before that, aren't y'all having another meeting?
Tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow, but they're not making any.
Not voting tomorrow.
Okay. So they won't know anything till after our meeting. We won't know anything. We won't know any decisions that they have made as far as bus operations until after our next scheduled meeting, which our scheduled meeting is the 27th. We won't know anything till after that on the 28th.
Do you have any business necessary for that meeting?
That's what I was getting ready to ask. You see what I'm saying? We're not going to get any kind of a confirmation from DCTA until the 28th of July. Is that correct?
Right, and I'm looking at my August calendar, I'm blocked out the first 2 weeks of August, basically, except for Wednesday, the 10th, and I've got travel on both sides of that, so it'd be risky for me to, given the state of the airline industry, like we talked about before. The best we might be able to do is move it up to the week of the 15th.
What if we don't have to have a July?
That's correct.
If there's not going to be any important, I shouldn't say important, a necessary item on the agenda for July, would everyone think about moving our meeting to August the 17th? Does that work for everybody? That's a Wednesday. I don't leave town till the 19th, so I could do August the 17th. And we should be able to have a new board member in by then. And if we could all be there, the 17th, if we can't, that's okay. Just let me know. Everybody will.
I'm scheduled to be at a conference on August the 17th.
Or what's good for you? What about before that? Yeah.
The 16th is open, actually the 16th.
I'll be, unless we do it in the mornings, that's my council meeting night,
Okay.
day. Yep.
Why is the 24th, the 24th is out because.
He's at a conference, you say.
No,
August 24th.
I'll leave on the 19th.
And when do you come back?
I don't come back to the 31st.
Oh, wow.
We're having to do it maybe
What about the 10th?
in a week for. Yeah.
And is that gonna,
Schedule.
okay, and I was gonna say, is that even gonna give Henderson Group a time to give us any kind of information on any kind of a decision on information they've received?
That'd be pretty tight.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Don't have enough time to get it.
That would be a pretty from the time that we're notified. To get anything back appropriately to the NTMC.
I could do Monday the 15th if we wanted to do a different day of the week.
Monday's tough for people. Can we do Monday the 15th? And that would be for our, we would not have a meeting in July, but that would be our August meeting.
I could do something in the afternoon of the 15th.
Does that give some groups enough time to prepare something? Of course, we're not gonna be able to get a budget by then, I wouldn't imagine. What was our time frame on that? What were you looking at, if I remember correctly?
I can do the afternoon.
You can or cannot?
I can.
See, we're together right now. They're doing a formal budget presentation and public hearing in August. Is that by requirement, Counselor, or
I'm sorry, I was looking at dates. Ask the question again.
on our budget calendar? We've got here that we're in the month of August, the formal budget presentations in public hearing. Is that required?
Yeah, we're required. I mean, I don't know how that date came about. But I mean, so there's some flexibility with that
There
date.
is flexibility. Okay. So is everybody okay with the afternoon of Monday the 15th? We probably will not be able to do a formal, well, I wouldn't think we'd be able to have time for a formal, but we may have to push that off to September. We could have some discussion on it, but I don't know.
I think that.
For that board meeting, it would be bringing information back to the NTMC board and advising what the DCTA board has approved for bus operations. And then have some discussion going forward from that.
Yeah, I think what's being asked is a revised budget proposal based on the bus service redesign. The decision's made in July. And it seems like it'd be good to have this board give at least one chance to discuss and deliberate before having to send something for DCTA board approval in September.
So what if we do this? And that's what I was thinking. If we'll have something by their 28th meeting. We do a meeting on 15th. Is everybody okay with Monday afternoon 15th? Is everybody okay on that? Okay, afternoon, what time?
Anytime after 1 o'clock.
I think like 2 or 3.
Let's do 2. How's that? So all right, everybody, 2 o'clock, Monday afternoon 15th. And if we'll have us, if you can, Henson Group, you can give us some type of on the service, some type of information of what we're gonna need to look at for a budget. We'll have a discussion on that. And then after the discussion, you prepare it for the month of September for us to present and do a public hearing. Would that work, Councilor?
Yes.
Okay. Does that work for everybody? Give us some time to look at it, discuss it. And present it to us. If we got some issues, items, they can go back, recalculate, redo, or something like that. And then we have it ready for presentation, approval on September.
I actually don't see, so in September, I've got a DCTA board meeting on the 22nd. But then the NTMC board meeting is not until the 28th of September. On my calendar.
Right.
So you would need to move that.
Yeah, we need to get the budget calendar figured out before we start guessing on these dates, because we're gonna have to get that synced up.
Why are they changing theirs? They always do theirs after us.
Yeah, we did flip, didn't it, for whatever reason?
Well, our board, I don't know why the NTMC, what's the regularly scheduled?
The
They
fourth
might
Wednesday.
the fourth Wednesday, and there happens to be. Yeah, so because the first day of the month is on Thursday, we have DCTA before NTMC.
Oh,
So this meeting will have to move to the 21st.
which meeting? The
This
September?
this NTMC board meeting in September will have to move to the 21st.
Is everybody
I
okay?
think we had the random with that last year.
I'm at a conference today, but
The 21st.
I'll be heading back.
What's everybody else on the 21st? Now, if y'all rather go ahead and do the August one, I won't be able to be here, but if y'all rather go ahead and do the August on the 24th. That's fine, please. I trust y'all.
Well, we've taken so much work to get it rescheduled. Let's not move it again. August 15th. At 2 o'clock. And then September 21st. I think we probably best to do it in the morning. I see a city mobility committee meeting on my calendar. I don't know that I'll have to go to, be asked to go to that or not, but.
I can talk to somebody.
Thank you. Yeah, well, yeah, I know somebody in City Hall. And, yeah, let's go morning of the 21st.
David, you're sure you're okay with that?
Yeah, I'll figure it out.
You sure? I'll approach you.
And I would, if okay, I have to be remote on that morning, because I have another commitment at 9. Which I can possibly push to 10.
We're gonna start the day.
Yeah.
On the 21st.
Okay, the 21st. Okay. Is that gonna, are you gonna be able to push that to 10? Because I got to say that if we're gonna do budget, that's gonna be
Yeah, I think so. As
longer
long as I
than
can
an hour.
as long as I can do remote, so if it's done by 10, then I'm at my location, good.
Everybody okay with that? We're good?
If we have a quorum, right, if we, leading up to September 21st, we know we're gonna have a quorum in person.
Well, we should have the other board member here too.
So it may be helpful for me to do it, but we have time.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, we should be able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Please express to DCT, we need that appointment in July.
I will make it known. I have no.
I know, you have no control, I know. I'll even make the phone call.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Good to meet you.
Just ask the question, ask that question. What was your question?
Oh, are we canceling the August 24th meeting?
We're changing it to August the 15th at 2 p.m. We're not canceling the meeting, we're just changing it to August the 15th, 2 p.m. What we are doing is canceling the July meeting. July 27th meeting. Isn't that correct? Did I get that correct? So we're canceling the July 27th meeting and removing the August meeting to the 15th at 2 p.m.
Need a resolution for cancellation for the bylaw.
We do not anymore, that's what we changed that, so. In the September meeting, what we
Oh, yeah, and we're moving the September meeting to the 21st.
Okay. So we can move that one. Move the 28th. Okay.
Anything else? We got everything squared away. All right, with nothing else, entertain a motion to adjourn. Make to adjourn.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you everyone for your time and your service. Appreciate it. Great.